First, I would like to thank Gary for having this debate with me, and for being so patient with me. We've been planning on doing this for over a year now, and it's been mostly my fault that it hasn't happened. The resolution of this debate is the idea that God is incoherent. What do we mean by incoherent? Well, there are two ways for something to be incoherent. Either the idea itself makes no meaningful sense, or the thing is simply impossible. Now, some people argue that the concept of God itself makes no meaningful sense. It is like pondering the self-distributed color in sleep wrenches. The what, you may ask? Well, that's the point. There is no coherent, meaningful idea under the word or words used. But I won't be taking that direction. Instead, I'm going to be arguing for the incoherence in the sense that God is an impossible being. There are basically two types of impossibility: physical impossibility and metaphysical or logical impossibility. Something is physically possible if it contradicts the rules for how the world works. For example, perpetual motion machines are physically impossible, or material accelerating past the speed of light is impossible, given the physical rules for the universe we live in. But what if the rules were different? Philosophers often speak of what is or isn't possible in terms of many possible worlds. A possible world is one that may be as similar or as different from our actual world as you'd like, but which makes its own sense internally. There may be a possible world where, for example, I never got married, or a possible world where the speed of light is not constant. It would seem that anything would be possible given the limitless number of possible worlds that you could imagine. But some things don't just contradict the rules of the world, they contradict themselves. Such things are metaphysically impossible. They cannot exist in any possible world at all. A square circle would be an example of a metaphysically impossible thing. A figure cannot have both four straight sides and yet no straight sides at the same time in the same way. Similarly, a married bachelor is impossible, since a bachelor is a man who is not married. Thus, a married bachelor would be a man who is both not married and who is married. Self-contradictory things cannot exist in any possible world, let alone our actual world. I believe that God is metaphysically impossible. But what do I mean when I say God? In the introduction to the debate, our somewhat befuddled moderator gave a reasonable definition of God, a being which is omnipotent, omniscient, eternal, etc. This is the classical God of theism, though it was mentioned that we may focus specifically on the God of the Christian Bible. I don't know about my opponent, but only one of the 5 points that I will be making deal with Christianity specifically. While I try to be inclusive, I cannot cover all possible God concepts. So if the God you believe in isn't covered by what I argue, I apologize. Essentially, God is a person, not a human being like you and me, but God is a person in the sense that he is a personal being with a mind, a will, feelings, likes and dislikes, etc. This is exactly opposite of an impersonal thing, such as a rock, or a number, or a mechanistic law of nature. It is said that humans are made in the image of God, which is why we too are persons and not merely impersonal things. But God is more than any human person. God is infinite. God transcends the limitations of us lesser beings. God has all the great qualities to a maximum degree and none of the non-great qualities. God is a perfect person. Why is God perfect? I believe it is because we want him to be. I believe that humans make all gods in their own image. In the case of the God of theism and Christianity, that image is idealized and perfected. God has all the things we want and none of the things we don't. The problem is, when you take all of the things that you want and mash them together like some divine Frankenstein's monster, what you're left with isn't logically coherent. I may really love circles, and I may really love squares, to the point where I think the greatest thing ever would be a square circle. But no matter how much I want one to exist, it simply cannot. It is metaphysically impossible. So what about God is impossible? Well, let's look at the first attribute I'll be arguing, God's mind. The mind is the essential quality that makes something a person. A person has hopes, dreams, fears, desires, thoughts, and a will to do things. A person has feelings and experiences the world around them. It is a person's mind that allows them to do these things. In contrast, A rock or a tree is not a person. It does not have hopes, dreams, fears, desires, thoughts, or a will to do things, as far as we know. It has no feelings and does not experience the world around it. It has no mind to do these things. God, as a person, also has a mind. The God of theism and Christianity, in particular, is not some distant, impersonal, clockwork deistic God who runs things from afar without any interest in his creation. The God of theism and Christianity has a will by which he chooses things and causes things to happen. He has a desire to see humans saved and to not commit sin. He loves his creation, even though he is often angered or saddened by it. But there are things about God having a mind which make God impossible. And these are my 5 points. First, there is the fact that all minds that we know of are at least associated with, though some like me would say completely generated by, a physical brain and body. Even things which are physical but don't have any kind of brain don't seem to have any kind of mind. It appears that the brain is a necessary part of having a mind. But God is immaterial and has no physical body or brain. To say that you can have a mind without a corresponding physical part is similar to saying that something can be green while not absorbing or reflecting the corresponding frequencies of light. What sense does it make to say that something is green without the physical aspect of being green? To say that God can have a mind without having the necessary components of a mind is like saying that a square circle has both 4 straight sides and yet has no straight sides. It is metaphysically impossible. Second, what do minds do? Minds think. They experience sensory input. They remember things and recall things from memory. They put ideas together to form new ideas. They make plans and consider courses of action. They look back on both past failures and triumphs and learn from them. But God is omniscient. There are no facts that God does not already know. No new ideas that can be constructed from old ones. No plans that can be made that aren't already in place. No experiencing of the world because all possible sensory data, despite the fact that God has no physical senses, is already known. There is nothing for God's mind to do in these areas. But if this is what minds do, then God's mind is a mind that is not a mind. Like a married bachelor is both married and not married. This is metaphysically impossible. Thirdly, even if we grant there is something that God's mind could do which might still qualify for it being a mind, God is also timeless and eternal. Only material things are temporal and operate within time. But to do anything is a temporal process. Not only could a timeless mind not do anything mental, but a timeless being could not perform an act of will and do something physical. Ironically, that would include the act of creating time, space, and the universe. The very definition of making an action is to take the state of things as they are, do something at some point, and then things are now different at all points afterward. That is a temporal sequence, a sequence of time. By definition, a timeless being cannot be part of a temporal sequence. To say that all could be accomplished timelessly would mean that there would be 3 logically contradictory states of things at once. The state of things without the change, the state of the action, and the state of things with the change. 3 different states coexisting like that is like saying that the married bachelor is both married and non-married, or that a 4-sided triangle, for example, has 4 sides and yet only 3 sides. It is logically incoherent and thus impossible. Leaving God's non-mind mind aside, let's look at some other attributes of God which are self-contradictory and thus impossible. For my 4th point, we'll examine God's traits of justice and mercy. Having all traits which we consider great and having them perfectly, God is perfectly just. But what does it mean to be just? To be just is to treat everything according to its due. People get what they deserve, no more, no less. It is one thing to be mostly just or reasonably just, or to judge people most of the time or as best as one can do according to what they deserve. But God doesn't do anything halfway. God supposedly exemplifies perfect, unfailing justice. But what then does it mean to be merciful? To be merciful is to reward someone greater than what they deserve, or at least to punish them less. The opposite would be cruelty, to give people less than what they deserve, or to punish them more. But both mercy and cruelty have something in common. They are both unjust. If justice is to give someone exactly what they deserve, then giving them more or less is, by definition, unjust. God cannot be both perfectly just and yet be merciful. He could be reasonably just, or mostly just, or every once in a while just, and still be merciful. But to be both perfectly just and yet still merciful is as impossible as being perfectly round and yet still square. It is metaphysically impossible. Finally, I wish to make a point about a specifically Christian doctrine. Not one that all Christians hold, but a lot of them do. It is known as the hypostatic union, the idea that Jesus was, and presumably is, both 100% human and 100% God. There were several ideas about the nature of Jesus in early Christianity, which were rebuked as being non-orthodox or heretical. There was the idea that Jesus was God, who had simply come down in the flesh but was not completely human. Nope, heresy. There was the idea that Jesus was completely a human, but that he had ascended to godhood. Nope, heresy. There was the idea that Jesus was a blend of human and God, though not totally either, sort of a Greek demigod type thing. Nope, heresy. No, for many Christians, there is only one way for Jesus to be: 100% human and 100% God. But aside from the mathematical problems in this statement, there is the fact that part of what it is to be human is to not be perfect, to be limited and not limitless, to be bound by physicality, to be, essentially, not God. Without this part, one cannot be 100% human. A similar situation exists for what it is to be God. To be God is to be perfect, to be limitless, to be unbound by the physical universe, to be not human. In other words, in order for this to work, Jesus must be both human and be not human, to be God and to be not God, in exactly the same way that a married bachelor must be both married and not married, and a square circle must be both round and not round. All of these things are not just physically impossible, but metaphysically and logically impossible. They cannot be true in any possible world. Now, some may say that such apparent contradictions are simply a limitation of our minds, or our reasoning, or that it's all due to divine mystery. Some may even go so far as to say that God need not be bound by mere logic. But if logic and reasoning don't apply to God, if God can both have and not have all of these self-contradictory traits, then wouldn't it make just as much sense to say that God is both possible and impossible? And if God is impossible, then I have proven my case. Thank you.